I handed over the master key file at 9:13 a.m. 4 terabytes of data, 17 years of architecture, and the entire internal framework of a mid-sized logistics firm, compressed into a single black flash drive. I slid it across the conference table without blinking. Across from me, Madison Cross barely made eye contact. Her fiancé, a guy named Trevor with gelled hair and a $1,000 watch he didn't earn, nodded like he understood what he was looking at. He didn't. He wouldn't. But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything at all. Just nodded, stood up, and walked out. 20 years, gone in under 10 minutes. My name's Evan Marks. I'm 52. Or was, at the time. I started at Northbridge Logistics when fax machines still mattered and cloud meant weather. I'd built the entire IT backbone from scratch. Every firewall, every access protocol, every remote security checkpoint. And that morning, Madison, the owner's only daughter, told me I was no longer a cultural fit. Not incompetent, not underperforming, just not trendy enough for the rebrand she had in mind. I knew it was personal, not between us, between her and her father. She wanted the company to look new, young, forward-facing. And I was a visible reminder of how it used to run. Stable, boring, effective. So she brought in Trevor, her fiancé, a startup guy, no background in logistics, no background in infrastructure, just buzzwords and boardroom energy. Madison told me he'd be taking over my role immediately, that he'd need all credentials, all documentation, and full transparency moving forward. I gave her everything, every password, every terminal log, every admin key. I gave her exactly what she asked for, nothing more, nothing less. No argument, no exit interview, no sarcastic goodbyes, just a clean handoff. Because what she didn't understand, what Trevor couldn't have known, is that systems don't run on confidence. They run on discipline. And I was the last disciplined man in that building. She thought firing me was a reset. What she didn't realize was that she'd just pulled the pin, not out of spite, out of ignorance. And the moment I walked out of that office, I knew what would happen. Not in months, in days. Trevor would open a system he didn't understand. He'd trigger failsafes he didn't even know existed. And the company that had run quietly for 2 decades under my fingers would fold in on itself like a paper crane soaked in gasoline. But I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't show up angry. I wouldn't touch a single line of code. Because I didn't need to. They fired the man who knew how everything worked. And in doing so, they set a countdown they couldn't stop. I didn't go home right away. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post online. I just sat in my car in the parking garage, engine off, phone off, watching the tinted glass of the executive floor above. I'd parked in that spot for over 15 years. No one had ever noticed. Just another silver sedan tucked between pillars and apathy. But from that angle, I had a direct view of the main server lights on the 6th floor, the heartbeat of the entire company. They were green when I left. They wouldn't stay that way. Madison thought I was the IT guy, just the systems guy. The man who reset passwords, updated patches, cleared printer queues. She didn't know I'd spent the last 10 years turning that building into a fortress. Not because anyone told me to. Because I knew what was coming. Data leaks, credential farming, ransomware. No one at the top ever thinks about those things until it's too late. So I built layers. Invisible ones. Silent ones. Not to trap anyone. Just to keep everything stable. And now, the one man who knew how to walk through that minefield had been replaced by a guy whose only qualification was dating the boss's daughter. Trevor wouldn't read the logs. He wouldn't monitor the packet behavior. He'd jump straight into the dashboard, like it was an app on his phone. And that's where the Real clock started ticking. I wasn't worried about the systems crashing. I was worried about what they'd touch trying to stop it. Because the deeper you dig without knowing where you're standing, the faster the ground gives out. That night, I got a message from Corey. He was a junior dev, 2 years in, sharp kid. Said he'd heard the news. Said Trevor had already asked him to strip down the backend and modernize the interface. I didn't reply. Corey was smart. He'd keep his head down. But I knew what that meant. Trevor was poking at the foundation. The one thing I told them never to touch unless they had a full architecture map, which I hadn't included in the handoff. Not because I forgot, because they never asked. By day 2, the client dashboard went offline. By day 3, 2 vendors emailed me directly asking why their invoice uploads were bouncing. I ignored them. I didn't work there anymore. And by day 4, The support queue overflowed with ticket volume I used to clear before breakfast. Still, no calls from Madison. No messages from Trevor. They thought they could patch their way through it. They didn't realize they were flying a plane held together by code I wrote in 2009. And when that code collapsed, it wouldn't crash. It would vanish. Quiet. Instant. Total. They wanted me gone. They got what they asked for. And now, the system was giving them what they deserved. On the 5th day, the servers timed out for 13 minutes straight. That's all it took. 13 minutes of no shipments processed. No tracking updates. No client confirmations. For a logistics company, that's not downtime. That's a red flag bleeding across every contract. The system I'd built wasn't fancy, but it was smart. It didn't just store data, it analyzed behavior. And when behavior changed too fast, too suddenly, the system adapted. Or locked down. Trevor didn't know that. Madison wouldn't have listened even if someone told her. They thought I was just protecting folders and spreadsheets. They didn't realize I designed the system like a nervous system. Not centralized. Not exposed. Modular, responsive, and most importantly, unforgiving. I wasn't worried about malicious actors from the outside. I'd already accounted for those. I was worried about internal arrogance. People who believed knowing how to open a laptop meant they understood infrastructure. That morning, I went for a walk around the lake near my apartment. Left my phone at home. Just me, fresh air, and a quiet understanding that somewhere in a glass tower 10 miles away, chaos was multiplying by the minute. Later that afternoon, I got a text from Corey. Just one line. They're trying to reboot the legacy instance. It's asking for credentials nobody has. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That was intentional. The legacy instance was my last insurance policy. Not a trap, just a reminder. You don't rebuild something by burning the instructions first. I'd embedded the credentials behind a series of verification layers, encrypted, compartmentalized, and tied to authentication nodes no one could reach without the full stack documentation. Which, again, they never requested. Because they assumed handover meant control. It didn't. It just meant they'd inherited something alive. By day 6, clients started walking. 3 major accounts, gone before lunch. One of them had been with us since 2005. The kind of client you don't lose unless you give them a reason. Trevor gave them 3. By day 7, the first vendor filed a formal complaint. Then the payment delays started. Not because there wasn't money, because the accounting system couldn't sync with the new API Trevor tried to modernize without mapping dependencies. He didn't know where the arteries were. And when he cut into the code, the system didn't scream. It just shut down. No warning. No error message. Just nothing. That's what happens when you fire the last guy who knows where the skeletons are buried. Not because he hid them, but because he buried them properly. Systems don't go down in flames. They go silent. And that's when the real panic starts. By day 8, they stopped trying to fix the system. They started trying to replace it. That's when I knew it was over. They thought they could rip out 2 decades of infrastructure and rebuild it in a week with consultants and borrowed code. Like they were just switching phones or updating an app. What they didn't understand was that this company wasn't running on software. It was being held together by it. And now they'd cut the cord. Vendors stopped responding. Client calls started going unanswered. The mainframe's queue spiked to over 12,000 unresolved requests, each one a timer ticking down to a lawsuit, a cancellation, or worse. Still, no one contacted me. I wasn't offended. I was impressed. There's a special kind of pride that keeps people sinking in silence. Madison had it. So did Trevor. I could almost see them sitting in the executive suite, lights dimmed, voices low, pretending everything was under control while the walls cracked around them. But systems don't respond to pretending. They respond to maintenance. Precision. Respect. Trevor thought he could brute force his way through digital structure. Patch a hole here, reroute a call there. Tell the interns to reset routers and servers without knowing what they were tied to. Every shortcut opened another wound. And by day 9, they were bleeding out. Corey called me that night. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. Said they were bringing in a tech recovery team, that they'd flown someone in from New York who promised to restore the backend by Monday. Said Trevor looked pale. Said Madison had locked herself in her office for 3 hours after a client screamed at her over Zoom. I played the message once, then deleted it. They were trying to reverse engineer 20 years of stability with 3 days of panic. The thing about stability is you don't notice it until it's gone. Like air. Like trust. Like someone quietly protecting everything you never thought could break. On day 10, the front end crashed for good. All user data gone. Vendor dashboards frozen. Payment systems offline. Even internal emails were bouncing between departments, looping in on themselves like a dying echo chamber. And still, I hadn't said a word. No angry LinkedIn post. No told you so email. No smug call to the old boss. Just silence. Because the system was speaking for me now. It was telling them everything they needed to know. That I had never been the IT guy. I'd been the nerve center. The invisible spine that kept their empire upright. And when they cut me out, they cut out the part of the company that never needed applause. Just permission to work in peace. And now, they were learning what happened when that permission was revoked. By day 11, it hit the news. Not front page. Not yet. But buried in the business section of a local outlet, right between a real estate collapse and a traffic rerouting update, there it was. Northbridge Logistics reports critical outage. Delivery delays expected across 6 states. 6 states. When I built the logistics scheduler, it had been designed for 3. That system had scaled with us, silently, invisibly. Because I didn't just write code. I wrote habits into machines. I programmed buffers, self-healing sequences, delayed loops for peak hours, fallback mirrors for remote access. Trevor had disabled 2 of them on day 7. Said they were outdated. The article barely scratched the surface. Just enough to raise eyebrows. Just enough for clients to start calling competitors. Just enough for investors to start asking questions. The thing about digital failures is they don't stay digital for long. By day 12, trucks started stalling. Not breaking down, stalling. Because routing data wasn't syncing with dispatch. Drivers were getting 3 different instructions from 3 different apps, none of which matched reality. Inventory counts were wrong. Warehouse slots were misaligned. One shipment meant for Chicago ended up in Tulsa. Another was left sitting in the Arizona heat for 36 hours, medical equipment. That one made it to Twitter. Madison still hadn't made a public statement. She was handling it internally, according to the company's front desk. But silence, when the building's on fire, doesn't look calm. It looks complicit. Clients started leaving fast. Some didn't even call. They just pulled data access, rerouted accounts, and sent generic closure emails. And Trevor? I heard from a former coworker he'd started sleeping in the office. Not working, just afraid to go home. The irony didn't escape me. The man who took my chair was now hiding in my systems, hoping something would suddenly make sense. But it wouldn't, because he wasn't trained to listen. He was trained to win. And systems don't care about winners. They care about integrity, maintenance, loyalty. By day 13, 2 vendors filed breach of contract claims. Small ones, but enough to open the floodgates. By day 14, the board called an emergency meeting. It wasn't the collapse that frightened them. It was the silence. No public explanation. No recovery roadmap. Just a vacuum where leadership should have been. They fired Madison by the end of that week. Trevor resigned 2 hours later. No press release. No farewell. Just gone. The tower they'd remodeled with glass and steel was now a hollow monument to short-sightedness. But I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I didn't even update my resume. Because I wasn't looking for applause. I was looking for proof. That even in a world obsessed with speed and noise, discipline still mattered. That systems remember who built them. And they know exactly what to do when that person's gone. By day 15, the company had no leadership, no systems, and no client trust. But the building still stood. Empty chairs, blinking monitors, a boardroom with high ceilings and no decisions. It didn't collapse with a bang. It just went quiet, like a theater after the lights come up and no one claps. I drove past the office once. Not to gloat, just to see. The parking lot was half full. A few staff still trickled in. Probably the ones clinging to hope that someone, anyone, would take charge. But Northbridge wasn't a company anymore. It was a shell, a container for failure dressed in branding. And all of it, every silent screen and unanswered phone call, traced back to one decision. Replacing a system architect with a speechmaker. Trevor was gone. Vanished. Deleted his LinkedIn. Scrubbed social. Even his engagement to Madison didn't survive the implosion. She resurfaced a month later with a blog post about learning from leadership failure. No names. No accountability. Just buzzwords. The same ones that sank them. I didn't reply. Didn't comment. Didn't share. Because that wasn't my war anymore. The wreckage they created didn't need a witness. It needed a silence deep enough to echo back every decision they'd made. I got a call from the board. An offer to consult. Help them pick up the pieces, they said. Get things running again. I said I'd think about it. Then never called back. You can't fix what's rotten at the root. You can only replace it. And I had no intention of rebuilding something I once held together with my bare hands, only to be discarded when it looked too easy. Some companies fail from the outside. Bad markets, hard luck, impossible timing. But this wasn't that. This was pride. Pure, calculated, arrogant pride. They thought systems were magic. That tech was plug-and-play. That someone like me was an accessory, not an anchor. And so they pulled the anchor, watched the ship drift, then vanished when the waves came. Meanwhile, I had peace. No calls at 2 a.m. No security breaches to intercept. No last-minute fires to put out because someone forgot what redundancy meant. Just quiet. A quiet I'd earned. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't sabotage. It was consequence. They'd asked for the keys. I gave them everything. Because giving someone exactly what they asked for isn't cruel. It's clarity. And sometimes, clarity is the sharpest weapon a man can wield. I never planned to start again. After 2 decades at Northbridge, I figured I'd earned the right to disappear. No more long hours. No more emergency server patches at midnight. No more pretending that loyalty would ever be valued as much as flash. But silence has a way of sharpening the mind. It doesn't just heal, it recalibrates. After 3 weeks of stillness, I opened the old hard drive. Not the backups, not the legacy stack, the personal archive. The one with every sketch, every draft system I'd never proposed because it was too advanced or not a priority. I hadn't built systems to impress people. I built them because order mattered. Because when the wrong lines of code are copied or the wrong access is granted, people don't just lose data, they lose trust. I started mapping out a new architecture. One built not for a company, but for scale. Not for approval, but for resilience. Nothing fancy. Just clean protocols, lean data flows, full visibility. For the first time in years, I wasn't designing for someone else's deadlines. I was designing for my standards. Then came the calls. One from a vendor who used to work with Northbridge. He said he'd heard what happened. Asked where I was headed next. I didn't answer. Another from a mid-sized logistics firm 3 states over. They said they were reviewing internal systems and needed someone reliable. Said they were tired of working with buzzword architects. I asked them one question. What's your protocol for redundancy at scale? They didn't have one. So I declined. I wasn't being arrogant. I was being exact. I'd spent 20 years keeping things from breaking while people above me assumed I was disposable. I wasn't going to rebuild just to end up back under the same boot. Instead, I spent the next month refining my blueprint. No investors. No co-founders. No app launch countdown. Just me, a black notebook, and a server rack humming in the spare room. When something works, you don't need to advertise it. You let the silence speak. And slowly, word started spreading. A data firm from Austin asked for a consult. Then a startup in Raleigh. Then a healthcare platform in Oregon. They didn't want a flashy CTO. They wanted someone who knew how to keep the lights on without being told. So I gave them plans. Not systems. Plans. If they wanted me, they could use the blueprint. If they wanted stability, I'd offer strategy. But if they wanted noise, if they wanted dashboards and slogans, I told them to keep walking. Because I wasn't just rebuilding systems. I was rebuilding terms. And this time, the only name on the server would be mine. The first email came from Madison. Subject line, quick chat. No signature. No explanation. Just a thread left open, like she expected I'd rush to answer. I didn't. 2 days later, Trevor tried. He didn't write. He called. 5 times in a row. Left one voicemail. His voice was slower now. Measured. Tired. He said they were looking at rebranding and rebuilding trust. Asked if I had any interest in coming back, maybe as a consultant. I sat with that for a full hour. Not because I was tempted, because I wanted to feel nothing. And I did. No anger. No satisfaction. No curiosity. Just silence. The kind of silence that lives inside people who don't forget why they left. By then, I'd already onboarded 3 new clients, quiet ones. No drama. No press releases. Just contracts signed with clear terms, systems built from the ground up, clean, lean, fully transparent. No one touched a line of code without understanding it first. No one made decisions without seeing the impact for layers deep. It was the opposite of Northbridge, and it was working. A week later, one of the Northbridge board members reached out, said they'd learned a lot from the collapse, said they'd fired half of leadership, said they were ready to do things differently. I told him I wished them well, but I wouldn't be returning. He tried again, this time with numbers. A 3-month retainer, travel covered, full authority to restructure the system from scratch. I declined, not because I didn't want the money, because I didn't trust the room. You don't go back to a building that collapsed and hope the new paint makes it stronger. That's not restoration. That's denial. They'd had me for 20 years. They had every opportunity to listen, to learn, to build something lasting. But they didn't want a builder. They wanted a placeholder. Someone to keep the lights on quietly while they played with glass walls and fake innovation. So when the lights finally failed and they were left in the dark, they assumed the man who built the system would come back to fix it. But I wasn't there to fix anything anymore. I was building elsewhere. And what I was building didn't need headlines or promises or second chances. It needed discipline. And it had it, because this time, I answered to no one. The door they slammed behind me wasn't locked. It was sealed. From my side. Legacy isn't what you leave behind in a company database. It's not your title on a glass door or a plaque in a hallway nobody walks down anymore. It's not the goodbye cake or the performance reviews signed by people who forgot what you did by the next quarter. Legacy is what survives after your name is erased. After Northbridge went under, no one talked about the architecture. Not in the boardroom, not in the press, not in the teardown articles. They only mentioned Madison's name and Trevor's and how the leadership struggled to respond in time. But the systems, those they dissected like black boxes. External audits called it overly complex and difficult to scale. They missed the point. It wasn't built for them. It was built to survive them. Because I knew the day would come when they'd push too far, too fast, too carelessly. And I wanted the system to buy them time, even when they didn't deserve it. That's legacy, not the server uptime or the delivery rates. The silence that held when chaos tried to break in. I watched from the outside as former clients of Northbridge quietly adopted the frameworks I offered. Smaller, sharper, leaner. No fluff, no ego, just structure. They didn't need a savior. They needed someone who didn't panic. Someone who had already watched everything burn and knew how to lay foundation without looking over their shoulder. I didn't call myself a founder. Didn't build a startup. Didn't chase Series A. I just did the work. Woke up, drank coffee, built. I didn't hire a marketing team. Didn't post screenshots. Didn't pitch. And yet, people kept showing up. Because when the world's loud, quiet becomes a signal. By month 6, I had more requests than time. I never raised my voice. Never made a pitch deck. Never asked for respect. I just did what I'd always done, made things work. The difference now? Nobody could fire me for it. Nobody could replace me with a fiancé or a buzzword. Because the seat I sat in wasn't given to me. I built it. And when you build something from nothing, your legacy isn't what they remember. It's what they can't replace. No matter how hard they try. It didn't end with a press release. There was no dramatic reveal. No viral thread. No confrontation in a boardroom where I slammed a folder of evidence down on polished mahogany. That's not how real endings work. Real endings happen in silence. Like a power grid that shuts off, room by room, until the only sound left is your own breathing. I never went back to Northbridge. Not once. The building eventually sold. A healthcare tech firm moved in. Stripped the place down. New signage. New layout. New systems. Nothing remained of what I built. Not physically. But traces of my structure still lived in backup drives and habits, in the way teams were forced to rethink how they handled data, access, responsibility. The ghost of order haunts chaos, whether people acknowledge it or not. And I let it. I never needed credit. I needed clarity. Clarity that I wasn't just a replaceable part in a corporate machine. Clarity that when I left, what fell apart wasn't just a business. It was a lie people told themselves about control. And the people who thought they had it never really did. Some of them landed on their feet. Trevor ended up working for a digital supply chain firm. Lower title, less visibility. Madison started a consultancy that fizzled out after 8 months. The board scattered, replaced by younger, louder, equally temporary voices. And me? I stayed quiet. Kept building. A team formed around the work. Not because I asked, but because they saw something worth following. People who didn't care about corner offices or performance bonuses. People who showed up every day ready to execute, not impress. We didn't name the company after me. Didn't hire PR, didn't chase headlines. We focused on uptime, on security, on redundancy, on systems that don't just scale, they endure. A client once asked if I ever missed the old company. I said no, because what I had now wasn't built on favors or promotions or proximity to power. It was built on silence, strategy, and structure. And that kind of foundation doesn't need defending. It just stands. I don't know what Northbridge could have been if they'd valued the work instead of the spotlight. But I know what I became when I walked away. Not bitter, not broken, unmistakable. And that's the kind of ending I don't have to explain. Some men fight back loud. Some just make themselves impossible to replace. And when the dust settles, guess which one they remember. That's it. That's the story. Now sit with the silence. It'll tell you more than I ever could. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.